Welcome to part two of our series on social psychology. We're picking up now with the topic of conformity. So conformity means what you think it does, which is changing our behavior to adhere to social norms. And of course, the social norms depends on what group you're in. But examples of conformity are styles of dress, what we wear. These days, social distancing, facing the front of an elevator, table manners, and even wearing a mask. So anything that are these unspoken rules of how people are supposed to behave, or sometimes spoken rules. For example, with social distancing in that photo, you see green circles on the sidewalk. You're supposed to stand that far apart in social distancing. So sometimes the rules are explicit, sometimes they're implicit, but we pick up the rules from the groups that we're in. And when we adhere to those rules, that is conformity. Solomon Asch was one of the first people to study conformity and the factors that led to conformity. And he did a series of experiments in the 1950s that led to a greater understanding of what happens when we conform with the group or when we don't. So here's the classic conformity experiment. You would have 7 to 9 people were invited to come into a room for a study on visual perception. It was actually a study on conformity. Actually, only one person in the group of 7 to 9 was the experimental participant. The rest of the people in the room were confederates of the experimenter. So they were all working with the experimenter, they were actors, pretending to be students. And here was the procedure. The group was shown a series of cards with a standard line and 3 comparison lines. There were 18 trials, 12 with the conformity dilemma. So if you look at those 2 cards, you'd be shown the card on the left and say which line, A, B, or C, on the right matches the standard line. Now you would look at that and say C. C has the same length. So they had 18 trials like this, obviously different line lengths, and 6 of them matched and were appropriate, and everyone in the group gave the right answer. But in the other 12 trials, there was the conformity dilemma, where the individuals in the group were giving the wrong answers. So, for example, in that card, maybe people in the group started saying that A was the match to the standard. So at first, in the first few trials, everyone gave the right answer. And then people in the group started to give clearly the wrong answer. So now, what would the study participant do? Would they give the right answer? Would they stick to clearly the right answer? Or would they give the answer that conforms with everyone else in the group and just go along with everyone else? What do they do? So what Asch's study showed was that all participants showed discomfort and disbelief at other people's responses. However, only 1/4 of them, or 25%, remained completely independent, always giving the right answer, meaning that 75%, or 3/4 of them, caved to the group consensus. So 75% of the time, they would just go along with what the group said. 50 to 80% of the people conformed at least once. So maybe on some of the cards they gave the right answer, but at least one time, 50 to 80% of the people gave the group answer. And then 1/3 of the participants went with the majority on half or more of the trials. So again, about 30%, 33% of the people just went ahead and agreed with the group on half or more of the trials. So, okay, so what does that tell us about conformity? Well, they redid this study many different ways. And one of the biggest factors that influenced conformity was the size of the group. The larger the group, the more conformity there was. There had to be at least 3 to 4 people for the effect. So if they did it with a group of 2, one person who was the confederate and one person who was the actual study participant, the effect did not hold. You just had the person would continue to give the right answer. That one other person didn't influence them. But if there were 3 or 4 people, then that individual would start to conform to the group. Another thing they found was that the culture that the people came from, that the individual came from, made a difference. So collectivist culture members were more likely to conform to the group than individualist cultures. So some cultures are collectivist, meaning their way they think has to do with what's good for the group. We do what's the best for the group, not what I myself think. Individualist cultures, like the United States, people are very much individuals. It's that whole independence, I think, for myself kind of notion. So those people were less likely to conform. Okay. Now, there's not one right or wrong way of being here, right? The collectivist cultures are known for caring for their family members and doing self-sacrifice for the good of the group. And that can certainly be a terrific thing. So it's not one is right and one is wrong. They're just different. A third factor is the desire to be liked. If a person wants approval from the group, they just have a strong desire to be liked, obviously they're more likely to conform to the group norms. And groups that had a strong sense of togetherness or cohesiveness were more likely to conform with each other. So think about the implications here of warning for peer pressure of school kids or gangs or even boardrooms of, you've got a bunch of people that work together on a board of directors or maybe for a charity or some other committee. And everybody wants to get along and everybody hates conflict and everybody, feels like we have a strong group identity. That turns into what's called groupthink. And disastrous decisions can be made when there's nobody who is so-called is willing to so-called speak truth to power. If one person is not willing to say, wait a minute, let's stop and think about this for a second, then people will go along. Going back to school kids, I remember my stepson came home one day. He had been about maybe 13 years old, 12 or 13, and he felt very guilty because somebody had cigarettes. And there was a bunch of kids standing around and they were passing around just a regular tobacco cigarette. And he said, I know it was wrong and I never wanted to smoke, but it was so hard to say no. So he was confessing that he had taken a couple drags off a cigarette. And, that was really kind of sweet. But, the fact is that he experienced right there that group cohesiveness, that desire to be liked, that desire to be part of the group, led him to do a behavior that he really regretted. And of course, that's not really a big deal because he learned to say no later. But if you think of certain decisions that can be made politically or with large sums of money in a not-for-profit, or decisions made in a jury, okay? What if you're on a jury and everybody's voting one way and you think something else? So how do you resist conformity? How do you go your own way? Well, one thing is that people that have a strong desire for personal control will resist conformity. They don't want people telling them what to do or what to think, so they are good resistors of conformity. In real life, in social support, in the experiment that we were just talking about, even if one other person, one other Confederate chose the right answer, again, it was deliberate, but if that person chose the right answer, conformity dropped dramatically. So if the group is not unanimous, conformity to the group will crumble. So what does that mean in real life? If you need to persuade members of a group to do something, find an ally first. Find somebody that you can convince that you're right. And now you got 2 people standing up against the group instead of just one person. It's much easier. And then more people in the group are likely to follow your way of doing things. So if you're serving on a jury and you have a strong opinion about the guilt or innocence of the person on trial, find someone else in the jury that seems to think like you do and bring them in and build your case together with that other individual. If you have school kids and you're trying to teach them about bullying and about how to resist a bully and how to not be a bystander, get your kid to find one other person that thinks like they do and to say, we're going to stand up to this bully. We're going to call him out. Okay, so having an ally will help people reduce conformity. Okay, another topic in psychology, which wasn't is a huge topic, is about altruism and the bystander effect. So first of all, let's define altruism. Altruism is the unselfish concern for the welfare of others. Usually this includes some kind of personal sacrifice. So, money, you give away lots of money, you give up your time as a volunteer, maybe you give up your personal safety to help someone who's in trouble with no personal gain. So why do people do it? Why do some people risk personal safety to help others, even strangers they don't know, while other people refuse to get involved? So if you see the photo on the left, I think this might be from an experiment, I'm not sure. But would the woman stop to help the stranger on the street? Now she's looking at him, but it looks like she's going to continue to move past. On the right is a photo from a group called Community Solidarity here on Long Island. They are a not-for-profit and they're good. They collect food from grocery stores and restaurants that are going to throw out food. And as you know, if you go in a grocery store, all the food looks perfect, right? It's because every night they're swapping out perfectly good food and throwing it away with the new shipment. So Community Solidarity has volunteers. Of course, this is all, they work it out with the store managers, but they have volunteers that go and pick up this food that's going to be discarded, even though it's perfectly good. And they bring it to different locations in the community that are impoverished, and they give the food away. So no money exchanges hands. It's staffed entirely by volunteers. I think even the executive director does not collect a salary. This was his vision, and it's all about giving. And his slogan is that food is a right. So they give it away, and it's really cool to go and volunteer at a group like this because you really see how you're helping people with fresh food. Most food pantries, it's canned food, boxed food. This is fresh food, vegetables and fruits and things like that, breads. So it's a great organization. Okay, so in 1964, a woman named Kitty Genovese was followed home from her job by a stranger and murdered in the entryway of her Kew Gardens apartment. And that's Kitty in the picture. This made page 1 of the New York Times, again, 1964. And it made national headlines. Now, if you weren't from New York, you wouldn't know. You would hear New York neighborhood. You picture this, that somebody's dying, on the streets in Times Square or something. It actually happened out in Kew Gardens, which is easy to remember because it's the same initials, Kitty Genovese, Kew Gardens. And he followed her home, and it was a total random stranger attack. Now, people get killed, so what made this different? According to news reports at the time, 38 witnesses heard the screams and saw and or heard the attack, and no one helped her. So that was the huge story, is that there were, more than 3 dozen witnesses that did nothing to intervene with the murder of Kitty, who died in the hallway of her apartment building. Which led social psychologists John Darley and Bibb Latané to study what they called the bystander effect. They wanted to know, again, they're social psychologists, Why would so many people stand there and do nothing when somebody is being hurt like this? So is helping others due to personality traits? Now we did a whole lesson on personality traits back in our personality chapter, but these guys are social psychologists. So while there's some evidence that maybe if you're one of these helpful altruistic people, that would help. But as social psychologists, they believed that circumstances surrounding the incident would have the biggest influence on what happens next. They called this the diffusion of responsibility. So we have common sense, right? And our common sense would tell us, oh, the more witnesses there are to an emergency, the more likely it is for the victim to get help. So let's say you have a flat tire on the side of the road and all these cars are going by, nobody is stopping to help you. Your car's broken down, you need help. Well, you would think, well, the busier the road, the more likely someone will help. But that is the opposite of what happens. What happens is that the sense of responsibility to help is diffused, spread across the number of people there are to witness the event. So as you see in the little cartoon, everyone's saying, I thought you'd do it. So in the Kitty Genovese murder, the idea that there were 30 witnesses and no help led to this idea of diffusion of responsibility. The responsibility to help others is diffused or spread out across all the bystanders. And it is also called the bystander effect. So the idea is that the more witnesses there are, the less personal responsibility any one of those witnesses has to take. The fewer witnesses there are, the more personal responsibility that witness has to take. So if you're the only witness, then either you help or no one helps. If there are 20 other witnesses to something, 20 people could help, right? So this is how they studied this. Students were asked to be part of a group for studying the problems of college students. And as you're seeing the pattern here, there was really only one student in each trial of the study, which was, one person was the actual experimental participant. And they were asked to go in a soundproof booth for privacy. And the rest of the people were supposedly in the other booths, and they were actually tape recorded voices. So the students were said, college freshmen have a difficult time adjusting. Please be part of this discussion on adjusting to college life and the stresses that you may have. And each person thought they were in a group of 2, or in a group of 3, or in a group of 6. And they spoke through microphones. The other voices were actually pre-recorded, but obviously the person didn't know that. So speaking through the microphones, each voice of the other people would describe problems of college adjustment. One of the people said he had epilepsy and had a fear of having a seizure due to stress. And then the voice was heard making odd noises as if having a seizure. So the question is, would that student, the experimental participant, call for help? And if they did call for help, how long would it take? And this is the diffusion of responsibility part. Was it related to the size of the group? So here are the results. In a 2-person group, 100% of the people called for help, and it took them 52 seconds. That was the response time to call for help. So you can understand why it would take almost a minute. If it was you, imagine you're listening in these headphones and you're trying to figure out, is that other person having an emergency or not? You're weighing, are they okay? Am I going to look like an idiot if I run for help when they're really fine? We make these decisions, okay? But it took a little less than a minute for people to call for help, and 100% of the people in the 2-person group did it. Well, what if you were in a 3-person group? In that case, 85% of the people in the three-person group went for help, and now it took about a minute and a half, 93 seconds. Okay, so again, it wasn't actually a three-person group. A person thought they were a member of a three-person group, and 85% of those people went and got help. In the six-person group, again, they think they're in a six-person group. 62% of the people helped, and it took them 166 seconds. So what is that, about 2.5 minutes or so, almost 3 minutes. So the response time went longer each time, and the number of people who got up to help dropped, depending on the size of the group. So here we show great support for the theory of diffusion of responsibility. The larger the group, the fewer the people helped, and of those who did help, it took them longer to go get help. Why? I thought somebody else would do it, right? That's the classic answer. I thought somebody else would take care of it. So what about this path to helping? When we help other people, or when other people get help, what are the factors? So this could fail at any one of these steps. And if you take a look at what they are, down at the bottom, emergency. Well, if there's an emergency, the first step is that somebody has to notice that something has happened. If you don't notice an emergency, obviously you're not going to stop and help, or if you don't define what you see as an emergency. So that's the step two, is you have to interpret what you see as an emergency. So in the photo in the couple slides back of the woman walking past the guy on the sidewalk, she might be asking herself, is this guy just sleeping here because he's homeless and it's not an emergency? Or is he actually sick? What's wrong? Okay, this third step is that the person has to take responsibility for providing help. That's the diffusion of responsibility thing. You have to say, it's me, I'm going to help. And then the fourth step is you have to decide how to help. What can I do to help? Okay, if someone's drowning and you can't swim, you shouldn't be jumping in the water, all right? But providing that you can swim, or you have a life preserver or something, then the fifth step is providing help. So for any type of emergency, whether it's an accident, whether it's a crime, medical emergency that someone may be having, all of these steps have to be in place for help to be provided. And as you could see, any of these could fall apart at any time, where it could go wrong. This was an article that was in the New York Times a couple years ago that I posted the article for you in your unit folder, and I just thought it was such a great article. A bunch of guys entered a subway car, and the subway car was filled with all kinds of anti-Semitic graffiti, and covered with all kinds of Nazi symbols and slogans. And these are random strangers sitting there in the subway car. Everyone's seeing this stuff. One lady speaks up, and she says, "This is horrible. Is there a way to erase it?" She just asked the question. Another person sitting in the car remembered that hand sanitizer can remove Sharpie. Now, this was pre-COVID, so not everyone was walking around with hand sanitizer in those days, but I guess enough people were. So he just stood up and he said, "Does anybody have Purell?" And a lot of people did, and other people had tissues. So a few riders got up to scrub the graffiti, and someone else was recording it, and that is a picture. Someone got out his phone to record it. And within a few minutes, before they even got to the next train stop, I think, all the graffiti was gone. And as is typical in New York, people got off the train. But the person that had recorded it posted the video. And it didn't take long before that video was trending all over the place. And again, I put the article up. You can read that. It's a really great New York story of people pitching in to do the right thing who are total random strangers. So let's circle this back to Kitty Genovese. The Kitty Genovese story has been taught in every intro psych class since the 1970s. I learned it when I took intro psych in 1975. And, it spawned all kinds of research, as we talked about diffusion of responsibility, the path to helping, all the steps to helping other people, what to do, how to teach people personal and social responsibility. But the question is it true that no one tried to help her? And it turns out that it's not true. In the movie The Witness, which I can give you the link to, is a documentary written by Kitty's younger brother, who was always haunted by this notion that she died alone after, having been stabbed to death. And it turns out that the New York Times had a better story by reporting the facts incorrectly. And the Times now, later, tried to fix that. There was a woman, a neighbor and a friend, who did hear Kitty's screams and come back and help her, and was with her as she died. And she called for the police to come. The obituary of the woman that helped her, whose name is Sophie Farrar, I have also posted for you to read. So the story is not what we've learned for 40 years or 50 years. It's not what we've learned. What we learned was that there were 38 witnesses that no one helped. In fact, people did try to help, or at least one person tried to help, and one person was with her when she died. However, the other thing made a better story, and in fact, it did lead to some social changes. One was the study of diffusion of responsibility, which does seem to be a real thing. And two is that prior to that, there was no 911 emergency system. If you needed a police officer, you had to dial 0 for the operator. The operator would come on, and the operator would say, "How can I help you?" And you'd say, "Please connect me to the police." So then the operator would have to look up your local police station, your precinct, and then get the call through to the police. And you can imagine an emergency that this wasted a lot of time. So it was after Kitty Genovese's death that the 911 emergency system was created and implemented. So that was actually an amazing thing that came out of the case of Kitty Genovese. So I'm ending our semester and this chapter on my favorite quote, "One person can make a difference and everyone should try," which is by John Kennedy, President Kennedy. I really do believe this, and this is just my personal philosophy. If we talked about what values guide our behavior, what should we do to make the world a better place, we can be overwhelmed by forces that seem insurmountable. But I truly believe that one person can be that voice to influence others, and we can join our voices together and create real social change. Okay, well, thank you for listening to this series of lectures over the semester. I wish everyone incredible good luck and good fortune in the semesters ahead and in life. And if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to email me. Have a great vacation.